There are moments in life when you feel different, when something deep within you whispers that you don't quite see the world the way others do. You can't fully explain it, and perhaps you've never been able to. It's not something you chose, it simply is. There's a unique lens through which you perceive reality, one that brings meaning to silence and depth to things that seem mundane to others. While people around you overlook subtle details, you feel them intensely. Silence, for you, speaks louder than noise. You sense when someone is in pain, even if they hide it behind a smile. You feel the sorrow of others, as if it were your own, even when they say nothing at all. You didn't ask to be this way. You've just always been this way. Carl Jung once said that special souls are not born in comfort, but are forged in the silent fire of introspection. And maybe that explains it. Maybe that's why, even as a child, you often felt like you didn't belong, like your soul came from another time, another place entirely. While others ran toward the noise, you turned inward. While the world focused on what was outside, you were busy exploring the universe within. And that, too, came with a cost, a deep, often aching loneliness. Not because you were alone, but because you felt that no one else truly understood the way you feel things, the way you are. But that sensitivity of yours, that emotional depth, that way you connect with life, it isn't a weakness. It's not something to hide or fix. It's a signal, a reminder, a sign that within you lives something extraordinary, a soul. And not just any soul, but a soul that perceives more, that knows without being told. A soul that picks up on invisible frequencies, one that feels what others refuse to acknowledge. You carry an ancient truth inside you, one that you might not yet know how to put into words, but it's there, quietly burning in your chest. If you've ever felt like you're too much for the world, too emotional, too intense, too reflective, it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because the world hasn't yet learned how to hold the depth of souls like yours. But hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are awake. Awake in a world that is still fast asleep. And when a soul awakens, everything around it begins to change, even if it takes time. Having a special soul means everything touches you more deeply, not because you're fragile, but because your sensitivity allows you to see beyond the surface. You don't just notice people's words, you feel their energy, their sadness, their longing. The pain of others doesn't just pass you by, it lives in your heart, as if it were your own. You carry burdens in silence that others are too afraid to name. The world has probably called you too much, told you to toughen up, to stop thinking so much, to stop feeling so deeply. But what they don't understand is that you can't live any other way. And more importantly, you shouldn't. This way of being, this intensity, is not a curse. It's a blessing in disguise. Carl Jung believed that to discover your light, you must face your shadow. And you, with all your depth and complexity, have faced storms within yourself that others can't even begin to comprehend. You've sat in silence, questioning your purpose. You've felt emptiness that clings to your chest. You've asked again and again, what's the point of all this? And still, you're here, searching, asking, feeling. That voice inside you, that's your soul. And not everyone can hear theirs. Many drown it out with noise, with distractions, with pretending. But not you. You've learned to sit in your silence, even when it hurts. You've learned that wounds don't need to be denied. They need to be honored. That pain doesn't take you away from who you are. It returns you to it. Your soul is special because it chose to feel. It chose not to numb itself. It chose to awaken. And yes, that awakening can be painful. It can feel like a lonely road, but it's also sacred. In a world obsessed with escaping inward truths, you chose to go deeper. While others search endlessly for answers in the external world, you closed your eyes and began to ask questions that only the soul can answer. Who am I? What am I here to give? What does it really mean to live authentically? You may not have all the answers yet, but asking those questions that already sets you apart. It doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're finding your way back to your truth. A special soul isn't defined by what it accomplishes. It's defined by what it transforms. Every time you chose forgiveness over resentment, every time you allowed yourself to cry when the world told you to be strong, every time you opened your heart despite knowing you could get hurt, you were embodying your true power. Your soul doesn't need applause. It doesn't need validation. It vibrates on a different frequency, and though that frequency can sometimes feel isolating, it is never wrong. In fact, it's exactly what this world needs. And even if you've often felt like you don't fit in, the truth is, you're finally beginning to fit into yourself. You weren't born to fit in. You were born to awaken, to transform, to remind others of the parts of themselves they've forgotten. Jung once said, "A life not lived is a disease from which one can die." And you, even if you've hidden, even if you've gone silent at times, know that there's still a life inside you waiting to be lived. A fire that hasn't gone out. A light that, no matter how wounded, refuses to be extinguished. Your soul isn't special just because it feels different. It's special because it carries a mission that often lives beyond words, beyond logic, beyond what the eyes can see. And that mission isn't always grand or loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as choosing love in a moment of anger, as simple as telling the truth when it's easier to stay silent, as beautiful as seeing someone for who they really are when no one else does. Sometimes it's in the most subtle details, in the way you silently accompany someone, in how you listen without judging, in how you hold space for those who have forgotten how to hold themselves, that your true essence shines through. And maybe no one ever applauded you for that. Maybe you've never received recognition, praise, or even a thank you. But your soul doesn't need applause. It doesn't seek validation. It only seeks truth. Because when you have a different kind of soul, you can't follow the paths that others have paved. You grow tired of the noise, of the shallowness, of trying to fit into molds that were never meant for you. You're not drawn to empty gestures or superficial approval. There is something inside of you that has always searched for more, something more authentic, more profound, more deeply your own. And that search hasn't always been easy, because the more awake you become, the more aware you are of how asleep the world really is. You begin to see the contradictions hidden in everyday life, the pain dressed up as success, the fear disguised as ambition, the disconnection passed off as normality. But you can't pretend. You've tried. You've tried to adapt, to fit in, to do what was expected. And yet, something always felt off. There was a silent discomfort, a quiet emptiness, a persistent voice whispering, "This is not your place." That feeling was never a sign of weakness. It was intuition. It was your soul speaking clearly, asking you to return to yourself, to what you truly are, to the part of you that never sold out, that never completely dimmed its light. And there, in the midst of the discomfort, in the space of not knowing, in the feeling of not belonging, your true transformation began. Because special souls are not recognized in easy moments. They are forged in chaos, in doubt, in pain that forces them to look inward. And when you began that inward journey, something changed. You stopped looking for answers outside yourself. You no longer needed others to validate what you felt. You started becoming your own refuge, your own guide, your own steady flame. And in that place, you discovered something powerful. What once hurt you began to open you. What once separated you began to connect you. What once confused you began to reveal truth. Because a soul that has learned to be with itself is a soul no longer afraid of its own light. And that's when everything begins to take on a new meaning. It no longer hurts to be different. You start to honor it. You understand you weren't born to blend in, but to expand. You weren't meant to follow someone else's path, but to carve out your own, to walk where no footsteps existed before. You stop needing to be understood by everyone. Instead, you begin to attract those who can truly see you, not with their eyes, but with their soul. Because real connection isn't based on appearances, but on frequency. And when you elevate yours, everything around you begins to shift. That's one of the greatest gifts of a special soul. It awakens others simply by existing. You don't need to do big, loud things to change the world. Sometimes, just by how you look, how you listen, how you are, you begin to light up places that once only knew shadow. And not everyone can do that, because to reach that point, you had to fall. You had to break. You had to ask yourself the questions others were too afraid to speak aloud. And you chose not to stay in your wound. You chose to go through it, to turn it into understanding, into compassion, into a strength that doesn't scream, but stands tall. People who have walked through their own personal hell with awareness are the ones who later walk with the greatest humility. They no longer need to prove anything. They no longer impose themselves because they know who they are. And that truth, even when unspoken, is deeply felt. Your soul is special because it doesn't settle for mere survival. It longs to live fully, deeply, truthfully, with purpose. And that's why anything that isn't real feels unbearably heavy now. Empty conversations, forced connections, externally imposed goals. They no longer fit in your journey. Not because you think you're better, but because you've learned to honor your energy. And when you allow yourself to be, without filters, without masks, life begins to respond in a different way. You no longer chase after anything. You no longer try to convince or prove your worth. You begin to attract what vibrates with your essence, and you let go, without fear, of what you once tried so hard to hold on to. Because now you know, nothing real is forced, and nothing meant for you can be lost. At this point in your path, you no longer seek to belong. You seek truth, presence, peace. And in that process, something subtle but profound begins to awaken inside you. You reconcile with your past, not because you deny it, but because you now see it as sacred ground, the terrain that prepared you to awaken. You forgive what once hurt, not by pretending it didn't matter, but by understanding it deeply, by looking through the eyes of compassion. You begin to feel gratitude, not just for the good things, but for what made you stronger, wiser, more human. Your soul is special, truly, profoundly special, because it chose to awaken in a world that often prefers to remain asleep. It didn't settle for the superficial, but was drawn, almost instinctively, to the essential. And yes, perhaps that has made you feel alone many times. But that solitude was never a punishment. It was a preparation. It was a sacred space of silence, so you could finally hear what no one else could teach you, your own voice. Now you understand that everything you felt wasn't an overreaction. It was sensitivity. Your intensity wasn't a burden, it was a compass, guiding you in ways others couldn't see. The way you love, deeply, differently, isn't a flaw. It's precisely the kind of love this world desperately needs. So don't change, don't dim your light, don't hide yourself. This world already has too many copies, but your soul is one of a kind. When the soul truly awakens, it doesn't happen in a burst of fireworks. It's not a sudden flash of enlightenment or a dramatic epiphany. It's a quiet, intimate, almost invisible process on the outside, but inside, it's fiercely transformational. It's as if the broken, forgotten, or dormant pieces of you slowly begin to find each other again, as if something you've been waiting for, maybe even your entire life, finally starts to align. And in that moment, you realize you can no longer live the same way. You can't engage in shallow conversations anymore. You can't stay in jobs that dull your spirit. You can't maintain connections that only survive out of habit. Your soul becomes more selective, not out of arrogance, but from a genuine need to protect its energy. You begin to see that you're not here to be drained. You're here to be expressed, to flourish, deeply, unapologetically. Often, the most special souls are the ones who have endured the greatest trials, not because they deserved it, but because they needed to move through the heaviness in order to remember who they truly are. Some truths only reveal themselves in the dark. Some understandings are born only when the world you once knew collapses. Because it's in that moment, when there's nothing left to hold on to, that you finally discover you were what you were looking for all along. Everything you longed for was already within you, waiting patiently to be seen. You begin to see life through new eyes. What once felt like chaos now feels like movement, necessary, purposeful. What once felt like loss now feels like liberation. You begin to trust the process, even if you don't fully understand it. You learn to stop chasing after what walks away. You stop begging for what doesn't flow. There's a quiet wisdom within you that starts to guide your steps. And even when certainty is absent, your soul knows. And that's enough. The modern world will often ask you to be logical, productive, predictable. But your soul doesn't move in straight lines or follow clocks. Your soul breathes in cycles. It dances in spirals. It speaks in symbols. And it expresses itself through intuition. When you stop resisting its nature, everything becomes clearer. Not easier, but more real. Over time, you realize that true fulfillment doesn't come from meeting the world's expectations. It comes from being radically true to what your inner self whispers to you in silence. And that whisper, though invisible to others, transforms everything. It changes the way you walk through life, the way you choose, the way you create, the way you love. Your special soul didn't come here to be understood by everyone. It came to remind you that you don't need the world's approval to be wholly, fully yourself. The most powerful transformation of having a special soul isn't what you achieve outwardly, but what begins to unfold inwardly. There comes a moment when you realize that real evolution isn't measured by awards, titles, or recognition, but by how well you learn to be with yourself, how you speak to yourself when no one is listening, how you hold yourself up when no one else is there, how you stay loyal to your truth, even when it means disappointing others. That inner loyalty doesn't arrive overnight. It's born, after many mistakes, after countless moments where you betrayed yourself just to be liked, to fit in, to hold on to the little you thought you had. But a special soul can't stay away from itself for too long. It can try. It can distract itself. It can even get completely lost for years. But eventually, the moment comes, the one where you can no longer lie to yourself. And when that moment comes, everything changes. You stop chasing what once obsessed you. You realize that many of your goals weren't really yours, that many of your achievements were just masks, that many of your relationships were false shelters, keeping you from facing yourself. And yes, in the beginning, it hurts. Everything you built on a borrowed identity begins to collapse. You feel empty, disoriented, confused. But within that silent collapse, something ignites, a tiny spark, timid, barely noticeable, but so real that you can't ignore it. It's your soul reminding you who you are. And from there, from that most intimate space, you begin to rebuild. Not like before, not to please, not to impress, but to be fully yourself, with all that entails, your shadows, your light, your contradictions, and your truth. As you continue on this path of returning to yourself, something deep begins to shift in the way you relate to the world. You no longer live with the urgency of being understood. You live with the peace of having understood yourself. And from there, from that inner serenity, you begin to live more authentically. You become more mindful of what you consume, more aware of what you say, more intentional about who you share your energy with. You learn to set boundaries, not out of rejection, but out of self-love. You discover that solitude is not the punishment you once believed it was. It's a sacred space where your soul gains strength, where your creativity blooms, where your intuition sharpens. Because when you learn to be with yourself in stillness, everything changes. You no longer panic about emptiness. You no longer tolerate crumbs disguised as love. You no longer seek external validation to feel worthy. And from this new way of inhabiting yourself, you begin to build a different kind of life. The decisions you make are no longer driven by external pressure, but by an inner compass, quiet, but unmistakably true. You begin to feel what aligns with you and what doesn't. You don't need logical reasons. You feel it in your body, in your energy, in your soul. And while this might make you misunderstood by many, it makes you free. Free from conditioning, free from others' expectations, free to live from a place that is honest and real. And in that state, everything begins to align. Not because life is perfect, but because you no longer need it to be. You've learned that even chaos has its beauty, that even loss brings hidden gifts, and that every experience, even the most painful, is a teacher that brings you back to your center. As you continue moving forward on this path of reconnection, you begin to see, without forcing it, that your priorities change, naturally, authentically, because now your life is no longer shaped by what the world expects from you, but by what your soul is finally, wholeheartedly ready to express. What once felt urgent now fades into the background. The things that used to keep you up at night barely catch your attention anymore. It's not because you've become indifferent or careless. It's because you've come to realize that much of your suffering came from trying to control what was never yours to manage. Now, from a clearer and more conscious place within yourself, you begin to let go. You release the desperate need to have all the answers, to fix everything, to carry burdens that were never truly yours to bear. What starts to emerge is a sense of lightness. Not because life weighs less, but because you're no longer trying to hold it all together through fear or the exhausting desire to please others. You begin to trust that everything has its own timing, that things arrive when they're meant to and leave when their purpose has been fulfilled. You stop resisting change. You stop begging for someone's attention. You stop trying to explain the unexplainable, because you finally understood that you don't have to fight for what is already yours by nature, your peace, your truth, your path. And in the midst of this shift, something profound happens. You begin to experience time differently. You're no longer in a rush. You no longer chase after a version of success that never belonged to you. Instead, you find beauty in simplicity, in moments of quiet, in the sacred pauses life offers. What once felt boring now becomes your refuge, and what you once searched for outside, validation, affection, purpose, now begins to emerge from within. Because you've discovered that the more you give to yourself, the less you rely on a world that never truly knew how to give you what you needed. As time passes, this connection to yourself deepens. It becomes evident in everything you do, in the way you speak, the way you walk, the way you truly listen to others. You no longer need to have all the answers. Just being present is enough. Just seeing people for who they truly are, without filters, without judgment. Your authenticity becomes your language, and without even trying, it begins to transform every space you inhabit. You start to notice that your presence has an impact, even when you say very little. Your calmness says more than any speech could ever express, and your ability to truly see another person without labeling them creates a space where others can finally breathe a little easier. But it's not because you see yourself as better. It's because you've been through the darkness. You didn't run from it. You didn't numb yourself. You stayed long enough to understand it, to learn from it, to come back with light. And that is one of the most powerful gifts a special soul can offer. The ability to return from the abyss with a message. Not everyone can do that. Many escape, distract themselves, deny the pain. But you chose to go through it. And because of that, you can now stand beside others without controlling them. You can understand without needing to be right. You can love without needing to own. You can guide without manipulating. Because you learned how to do those things with yourself. And now you have something real to give. You're no longer trying to save everyone. You're no longer desperate to be seen. You simply walk in alignment with what you feel. And that, in itself, is enough. Those who resonate will come closer. Those who don't will continue on their own path. And you'll be at peace with both outcomes. Because your goal is no longer to belong, but to be in harmony with yourself. That's when you begin to understand that your sensitivity was never a weakness. It was a misunderstood gift. That your need for depth wasn't a flaw. It was your soul calling out for something more. That your discomfort with superficiality wasn't arrogance. It was a sign that you were born to go beyond what's obvious, beyond what's common, beyond what most people settle for. And no, not everyone will get it. Some will say you're too much. Others will think you're making it all up. But you no longer need to explain yourself. You've made peace with being different. And instead of hiding it, now you honor it. Because in your difference lies your essence. In it lives your truth. In it pulses your power. And if all of this has resonated with you, if deep down, something inside you feels that it's no accident you're hearing this, then maybe the time has come. The time to stop hiding who you are. the time to start honoring your sensitivity as a strength, to see your uniqueness not as a burden, but as the gift it truly is. The world doesn't need more masks. It needs awakened souls like yours. So if this message has reached you, if it's reminded you of something your soul already knew, then I invite you to keep walking this path with us. Subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue exploring these sacred spaces where the mind, the soul, and consciousness meet.